Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our PD Day. I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually coming to you from our Moncton campus. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Corey Hunter. I'm one of our child and youth care instructors. I've had the pleasure of working out of our Fredericton campus before transferring here to Moncton. In addition to being an instructor here with Eastern College, is my clicker working? It will be. You just wait for it. There we go. So in addition to being an instructor here with Eastern College, I've also been an activist and a public speaker for about 15 years, primarily talking about gender equity and the LGBTQ community. In addition to this, I am a child and youth care practitioner, and before coming here to Eastern College, I was a regional manager with CBI Health Group. And something else that some people do know about me and others do not is that I'm also a transgender individual. That's one of the reasons why this topic is very near and dear to me, and I've been talking about it for quite a while. But much like myself, as an individual who's been going through a lot of change in my life, so have my presentations, so have my topics, and so I'm hoping to share where I'm at and where our education is at right now with you today. So this is a little overview about what we're going to be looking at today. We have a few items on our agenda. We're going to start off by educating ourselves. We need to know what gender is before we can move forward. We really need to break it down to the very beginning steps. After that, we're going to look at the outliers from our regular or mainstream community, and this is our transgender community, people who are not fitting within our societal norms as a whole. Then we're going to look at coming out as a process, why we have to do it, and what it actually looks like for individuals who are coming out. After that, we need to look at what we can do to support these people. We're educational professionals, and it's our job to facilitate a welcoming and inclusive environment for all of our students and people coming into Eastern College. And finally, after we know how we can personally become attached to this, we're going to start exploring different allies and supports around Eastern Canada, as well as the impacts that they've had so far to date, and the impacts that we still need to be making moving forward. So to get us started, what is gender? That's where we said we were going to start, right? So we need to understand that first and foremostly, gender is a social construction. What is a social construction? Well, that's just a really fancy way of saying we made it up now, isn't it? Basically, we've done a lot of conversing over the decades and over the generations about what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman. And we've created societal norms that are based around those roles. And as we've gone through generation to generation, we've reinforced them, not only with the dialogue that we have with one another, but also with the entire worldly structure that we have around us. The World Health Organization has a definition for gender, and I'll tell you right off the get-go, this is only one definition that you're going to find that's out there. Who defines it as being the socially constructed characteristics of men and of women, the norms, the roles, the relationships between that group and between those two groups as well. It varies from one society to another. It also varies over time, and it can be changed. It's this variation over time, over geographic location, and the fact that it can be changed that reinforces the fact that gender is actually a social construction. You see, if it weren't a social construction, we would see every biological male dressing the same way, acting the same way, fulfilling the same roles. And we would see the same thing with women as well. Everything would be so much more parallel. We wouldn't have this variation around the world. So I want you to take a minute to stop and think about gender, and I want you to think about how this relates to you. Close your eyes for just a moment, if you'll indulge me. I want you to picture yourself. Picture yourself standing in front of a mirror. And I want you to think about exactly how you look. What are you wearing today? The clothes that you chose, what kind of top, what's on your lower half? Are there any accessories? How did you style your hair? What shoes are you going to put on your feet? What is it that you're getting ready to go and do? And who is it that you're going to do that activity with? Now, I want you to imagine for just a brief moment that you standing in front of the mirror all of a sudden opens their eyes and their biological sex is the opposite. The clothes you're wearing, the hairstyle that you chose, the activities that you're on your way out to go and do, are they all still acceptable? Or are you going to face some repercussions socially for your choices, for the way that you're expressing yourself? Is your favorite clothes still considered okay for you, or are people going to judge you on it? You can open your eyes. We all signal our gender identity in a lot of different ways. Clothes, hair, makeup, these are a few of the really obvious ones. Things like our accessories, the shoes that we've picked to wear that day. Though it's so much more than that, isn't it? It's the activities that we engage in. It's who we engage in those activities with. It's even down to the way we carry ourselves, the way we walk, the way we talk, the gestures that we use, the topics we're allowed to discuss. There are so many things in our society that we do to signal our gender identity on a constant daily basis, and a lot of times we don't even think about it. It's just the way that we are. Do we not hear little catchphrases all the time, like boys will be boys, when boys are aggressive and they're fighting, because that's the norm, right? Or what about sit up and cross your legs and act like a lady? I'm sure we've all heard something along that lines as well, right? But the guys are allowed to sit with their baseball hats and their legs spread wide open, and that's okay. I'm a little jaded about that one. But you see, even our nonverbal expressions, our postures, and the little ways that we carry ourselves, they're gendered in our society. Why do we do that? Well, you see, we do that from a very young age, too. And this is the other thing that surprises a lot of people. You see, I've held contracts with a lot of different schools. I've had the great fortune of talking to some school age groups that are as young as grade 1 and grade 2, while also doing continuing education with adults like yourselves. Some people question whether or not it's appropriate for me to be going in and talking to people who are in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3 about gender identity. But the reality is, we are so young when we start to form our ideals of what it is to be a boy and what it is to be a girl. I want to share with you a very, very interesting video. And I'm not going to share the video itself, but I want to talk about it. For anyone who wants to check it out, you can YouTube it. It's a TED Talk. And for the CYC instructors out there, it'll be a familiar topic for you. Batja Greenwald was a kindergarten instructor, a kindergarten teacher, and an educational specialist. And she very quickly asked her kindergarten class one day what kind of rules were out there for boys and for girls. The reason why she did this is because her class had been teasing one of their classmates. He had come in wearing a pink shirt, and they were very quick to tell him that pink was a girl's color. Don't you know? And so Batja Greenwald, their teacher, she quickly decided, you know what, this is a great moment to educate. This is a moment to have a conversation. And she asked boys and girls to start labeling, well, what do boys do? What do girls do? We came up with a pretty quick list, you see. Boys wear black and blue. They wear superhero t-shirts, of course. And what is it that they do? Well, they play soccer, they build towers, and they play with trucks, and they play with trains. Seems pretty sensible, right? Well, what about girls? What do girls do? Well, they wear pink and purple, and they wear dresses, and they wear crowns. A little bit of a princess theme, maybe, right? And what do? Well, they play with dolls, they do each other's hair, they like to dance. So even this young group of children, they already had an idea of what it was to be a boy, what it was to be a girl. Now, it didn't take that class long to start realizing the problems in these rules. What about the girls who played soccer? What about the boy in a pink t-shirt? These rules may be our societal norms, but do they really capture everybody? Are they actually inclusive to everyone? Now, I'm sure that we have parents out there who think to themselves, well, I don't teach my children about gender. I have never spent time telling my kids what it is to be a boy or what it is to be a girl. But the truth is, whether you've intentionally educated these youth or not, they've been learning it. They've been observing the way that you act and the way that other people act in their world and the way that people interact with one another. And on top of that, they've been observing this whole worldly structure around them, which is dictating which box they're supposed to fit into as a boy or as a girl, whether or not they should be wearing black, blue, and superhero t-shirts, or whether they should be wearing purple and pink and crowns. So, how did this happen? Well, we've created what we call a binary gender structure and a heteronormative world. That's a lot of really big words, isn't it? Well, let's start by breaking that down a little bit. Binary gender structure means the fact that we have built everything around two genders, male and female. They're kind of based off of our biological sex. That's where we got the genius idea from. And we created these social constructions about being a lady or being a gentleman based around that. Two genders, binary. Heteronormative, what does that mean? Well, a heteronormative expectation means that we assume everybody to be straight or heterosexual until we're told otherwise. Again, that's the societal norm. That's the way that we are, quote unquote, supposed to be in our naturalistic form. But does this really, again, capture everyone? The other part of this that kind of goes hand in hand is that belief that everybody is what we call cisgendered. This is another term that a lot of people don't really recognize, and it's interesting because a lot of the people I'm talking to are cisgendered, and they don't even realize that this is actually a word that relates to them. It's just a fancy way of saying that your biological sex meets the socially constructed gender that is supposed to align with it, if you will. A lot of people in our world are cisgendered. A lot of people in our world are heterosexual. But if we assume everybody to be either male or female, and we assume them all to be heterosexual, again, are we being inclusive to everyone? And our whole world around us has created this structure. It's not even just the fact that we think this, it's actually physical formations around us. When you walk into a shoe store, do you see a masculine section and a feminine section? Are all of the shoes sorted by size? Or do we see a men's section and a women's section, telling us what women are supposed to wear and what men are supposed to wear on their feet? Even for the younger generations, boys and girls, do we see toys sorted all by ability and by what you're doing and by age? To a degree, a little bit. But we see a lot of things sorted by boys and girls. A lot of things are engendered within our society, even our bathrooms and our facilities. I find it very interesting. When we go to the bathroom, are we there to do anything related to our gender? I hope not. We're supposed to be there for other purposes. But again, our whole world around us has created this structure that reinforces boys and girls, heterosexuality, cisgendered individuals. And it's not inclusive. It's not inclusive to anybody. I often say we do this wonderful little thing, I like this analogy, that when a baby is born, we like to do the Lion King moment. We put them up and the music is playing and we say, oh my goodness, it's a boy or it's a girl. And we put them in a box. That's what we do in that moment. We take that person, that little infant, and we put them into a box of expectations. We witness a biological sex. We assign a socially constructed gender, and we expect them to live within that framework for the rest of their life. No choices about it, no personal exploration, no self-discovery, but rather an instruction. This is who you are. This is how you're supposed to be. This is what produces stereotypes like boys don't cry, right? Why is that? Why can't we have heterosexual men who are in touch with their feelings? Why is that? And that's what these boxes do. They force people to act in ways they don't necessarily want to because they're nervous. Who wants to be socially excluded? Does anybody in the room here wake up and say, how many ways can I be hated by my peers and ostracized and put out to the fringe of society? How can I alienate myself just a little bit more? No, we don't do that. That's not what we do at all. We behave in ways that we think are acceptable within our society, within our worldly structure, within our workplace, our lives as a whole. So if people expect us to act a certain way, do we want to break that? No. We put ourselves into a little box. We compromise ourselves. Sometimes that means that we have cisgendered people who don't get to fully explore who they are, what they like, and who they could be. And sometimes that means we have people that don't fit into this structure, into this binary, heteronormative, cisgendered world. And what do when they feel like who they are is unacceptable? So now that we know what gender is actually all about, that's the first step. Now we need to start looking at those people who are outliers. We realize and recognize that a lot of people fit into that cisgendered, heterosexual kind of categories, if you will, but that's not everybody, and we need to know the rest of the community, because those are the ones that we need to make sure they don't fall through the cracks, that we're supporting them just as much as anybody else. So who are the outliers? It's the transgender community. I'd like to introduce transgender to you as an umbrella term. A lot of us think of it as being specifically an identity. And a lot of the times it is. For some people, that is the identity that relates to them. but we also tend to use it as an umbrella term that captures everybody out there who is not cisgendered. So we need to look at that community a little bit more in depth because we realize they're very dynamic. It's not black and white. It's not even black and white and gray. It's a very colorful spectrum. So the word transgender is an umbrella term, but it is also a term that a number of people identify with. It doesn't provide a lot of personal detail regarding surgery or any changes to the body or any transitioning efforts. So it's a comfortable term. It's a nice term. On top of that, it's becoming more socially recognized. So when we use it, it's something that other people tend to understand. A few of these other words that we're going to see show up are going to be a little more unfamiliar to some of us. And that's why we're having this conversation. They need to become familiar words. They need to become things we know about. So in addition to somebody who's transgender, which relates to somebody whose gender identity and their biological sex do not match, so they are not a cisgendered individual, we have a lot of subcategories. We have a transsexual individual, and this refers to somebody who is transgender, and they're going through some sort of medical assistance to assist them with the process of transitioning. That may be hormone replacement therapy for some individuals, or it could be surgical options as well. We have people who are genderqueer, non-binary, gender fluid, or bigender, and these are very, very interesting individuals because they showcase the gray area for us. So many times we live in the black and white of the world. But the reality with gender is it's a spectrum, and it's a sea of diversity. And these individuals are people who are not necessarily falling distinctly into one box or another. They're not living their lives exclusively as a male or exclusively as a female, but rather they are individuals who are either connecting with both or they are flowing back and forth between them. We also have people who are gender neutral or agender, because in addition to maybe relating to both of our socially constructed genders, maybe you don't relate to either of them. That's a possibility too. So is it as simple as you all thought? Or is it just maybe a little more complex? We like to make it complex. We love the gray areas. So the interesting thing about this too is that it is not a linear journey. I had this really interesting concept, you see. When I first started my transition a number of years ago, I thought it was a little bit of a linear journey. It's some sort of progression. You start at one place and you have to finish at another place. The way I pictured it in my head was almost like the Superman scenario where pedestrian walks into the telephone booth, spins around really quick, and they come out a superhero. It's really quick, it's instantaneous, and it's a total 180 spin, right? But that's not the truth. The truth is, as much as we saw that list of so many different gender identities, there are also so many different journeys, so many different paths, so many different destinations for people as well. And we need to explore what that looks like as well. First of all, we have social transitions. Some transgender individuals transition socially, and there are a number of reasons for this. Some people do so because they may not be eligible for surgical options. They may have health risks and be unable to obtain those goals. Other people may realize the difference between socially constructed gender and physical biological sex. For some people, this empowers them to live with their gender identity free from the confines of their body. They don't feel the need to go through surgeries or to go through options to change their body because they realize there's a difference there between the makeup of my body and what my gender identity is. And I honestly think there's probably a lot of feminists out there who probably love that idea, because I know there's a lot of women who have spent a long time persevering and fighting to have us not recognized just for being objects. We don't want to be objectified by our bodies, and neither does the transgender community either. So it's a very empowering situation for some people to be in. And other people, though, this may not be enough for them. They may see their journey as being different, and they may seek out medical attention and assistance, including hormone replacement therapy. Hormone replacement therapy usually includes two different medications, something to repress and something to replace things within your body. As an example, a male to female transitioning individual will take an anti-androgen, which will block the production of testosterone in their body while also taking estrogen supplements. Hormone replacement therapy can have great changes upon the body, but there is a varying degree of effectiveness. Some people get great results from hormone replacement therapy, while other people see very mild changes or differences. But it is still an option. It changes the way we feel. It changes a lot of our secondary sex characteristics. It can assist with the redistribution of fat within the body, the change of body hair and facial hair growth. It can change with the volume and the tone of the voice and how the pitch sounds as well. There are so many things it can do, but it's not the same for everybody. So what about those who don't feel as though they get the results they need from hormone replacement therapy? Well, there are further options as well. There's surgical assistance that you can get from medical professionals. And this includes options for secondary sex characteristics as well as primary sex characteristics that can be adjusted through surgery. Some people will opt to have both done, whereas some will only look for their secondary sex characteristics to be changed or only their primary. Again, the journey is not linear. It's not the same for every person. It's about how they feel and who they are as a person, as to where they need to go and what sort of tools they need to use to get there. Unfortunately, while I think it's a beautiful message, this is what comes to mind with a lot of people. Well, isn't it just enough to be gay? Why do people have to cross-dress too? I know, right? I hear some snickers and some laughing, but the reality is, this statement was actually made to me once, in person, face to face. This is an actual comment from somebody. And I think that a big part of this comes from the fact that they don't understand the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. There is a huge difference. Did anybody in the audience realize that up to this point we've only been talking about gender identity and we haven't even touched on sexual orientation yet? They are completely different things, and sometimes this ignorance speaks to the fact that a lot of people don't recognize that. So if we understand what gender and gender identity is all about, let's move on and understand a little bit about sexual orientation so we can start to combat statements like this. Okay? Sexual orientation is an enduring pattern of romantic or sexual attraction, or it could be a combination of both. And this is to a person of the opposite sex or gender, the same sex or gender, or to possibly both or to more than one gender. Again, it is not a really, really simple thing, is it? It's dynamic. There's more than one option. There's more than one type of person. We hear about some of these regularly, don't we? We hear about people who are heterosexual, who are attracted to people of the opposite sex. We also hear about people who are homosexual, which are also commonly identified as gay or lesbian. And these are people who are attracted to individuals of the same sex. Another commonly heard one is bisexual, people who are attracted to both sexes. But again, I'm here to show you and showcase the gray areas, aren't I? I don't want to keep it simple, and there's a lot more than 3 types of people out there. So let's have a look at some of the rest. We have people who are bi-curious, that are queer or that are questioning, that may be trying to figure out exactly where they are. Why is that? Well, I hate to blow your minds once again, but sexual orientation is not a static, permanent thing. It is often fluid. Alfred Kinsey developed a scale that helped people recognize that people don't necessarily have to fit into one little tiny category. He made a beautiful quote about pigeonholing people into these categories, and that's what we need to stop doing. We are very fluid individuals, and as we experience different things and we reflect on that, do we not change in other ways? Is it not possible that our sexuality could also change? It's a part of us, isn't it? Absolutely. So these are the people who may be questioning, who may be exploring, who may be trying to figure out who they are. And beyond them, we have other people too. We have people who are pansexual or omnisexual that may be attracted to pretty much almost anyone. Not to say they literally want to jump in bed with anybody or they're attracted with everyone. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that their biological sexes do not limit who they're attracted to. They're attracted to a person. It's not restricted by gender or by sex. Rather, it's about the person. Here are 2 that I love to share that a lot of people haven't heard of. Gynosexuals and androsexuals. Much like people who can be attracted to the same sex or the opposite sex, we have people who can be attracted to genders specifically. Gynosexuals and androsexuals are attracted to the female and the male gender, respectively, regardless of biological sex. So what this identifies is the fact that some people are attracted to women, whether they be transgendered women, transsexual women, or cisgendered women. And some people are attracted to men, whether they are cisgendered men, transgendered men, or transsexual men. And I think this really helps us to realize the fact that we are all different people with different attractions, different experiences, and different ways of being. That's what I really want people to take away from slides like this one and slides like the one where we saw earlier with all the different gender identities. It's not about memorizing a list. It isn't. Because with social constructions, the lists are going to change. As we create new understandings and as we continue to explore things as a society, I would argue the fact that we might see these lists continue to grow as we continue to acknowledge different ways of being and different types of people that are out there in the world. So memorizing this isn't going to help us. But remembering the fact that there are so many different people out there that we shouldn't be assuming. We shouldn't be placing people into boxes where we assume them to be cisgendered. We shouldn't be putting them into boxes where we assume them to be heterosexual. But rather, we need to be open-minded that there are so many different people out there if we're going to be inclusive to all of them. One of the products of this, I believe, is the fact that when we don't recognize that people could be some of these different identities, be them gender identities or sexual orientations, what we're doing is we're forcing people to come out, right? Because we're placing an expectation where this is how you should be. And if you are going to deviate from that heteronormative expectation, from that gender binary system, what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to tell people. Because otherwise, the pronouns they use, the examples they use, the goals they help you set in your life, none of them are really going to match up to who you are. Why? Because they're all going to be fabricated in this heteronormative binary structure. We're used to it. We're comfortable with it. And a lot of times, we don't even notice it. It's hidden around us. So coming out, what is that all about? Well, we need to explore that in a little bit more detail, don't we? It's this rigid expectations that we've put people in that reinforces our heteronormative society. It's not just the explicit things we say. When we walk into that shoe store and we see those labels of boys and girls, that makes an impression on us that we remember. When we see different people interacting and taking different approaches with different genders, when we see people always using examples of heterosexual couples, these are the types of things that reinforce it. Our language is no different. How often are you standing at the front of your class providing an example to your class? Are your examples not usually heterosexual couples or families with their children? Just the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine who manages a shoe store, and I was having a discussion with him about this, actually. I was bouncing some ideas off of him, and one of the things he said to me was, you know what, I never realized I do that. I talk to all of my associates about conversion, the amount of people coming into the store and the amount of people coming out of the store and how many of them have actually purchased product. And when I talk to them about the rates of conversion, I always talk to them about the average family coming in, mom, dad, and their 2 kids. Interesting fact, my friend who runs the shoe store is gay. And he himself didn't realize that he was also structuring his store in a heteronormative structure. We all do it. We don't realize we do it because it's implied around us and we get used to it. It's comfortable. It's so invisible to us. It's like going around with blinders, like those little horses at the fair. We can only see what's directly in front of us. When we open our mind, we take the blinders off and we see everything else around us in the periphery. And that's what we need to be doing with our language, with the examples that we use in class. A majority of people can't understand how daunting coming out actually is. It's a very, very challenging experience. Can anybody think of why? A couple ideas come to mind for me. First of all, I think of things like family and friends. I get nervous about, well, are they going to feel the same way towards me? Are they still going to support me? I get nervous about things like my job. I have to earn an income. I have to pay my bills. I have to support my family. What happens if people at work don't treat me the same, or I'm not able to keep my job? There are a lot of different fears that come along with it. Some of them are really big and tangible, like income and place of work. And some of them are really small, like the way people approach us and they talk to us and the words that they use. And these types of things, they scare us because we don't want to see our foundation rocked. But it's really hard to imagine it if we haven't been there. So I have a little activity that I want to do with everybody. You're going to notice on your chair there is a star. And there are 3 different colors around the room. There are blue ones, and there are red ones, and there are yellow ones. And we're going to be using these for the activity. You're also going to need a pen, so if you don't have one handy, make sure you take a quick moment to grab a pen from one of your awesome colleagues around you, because I know everybody came super prepared, which is great. So, what we're going to be doing with these stars is we're going to be trying to figure out and reflect to ourselves exactly how it feels to come out. And we're going to be trying to do this in a way that relates to us. So we're not just going to be doing it with our own sexual orientation, but we're going to try to make it just a little bit more personal. So what I want you to do is start by taking the center of your star. And in the center of your star, I want you to write something personal about yourself that you cannot change, but you could hide. I'll give you a couple of examples. Your eye color. You could wear colored contacts, but at the end of the day, if you have green eyes, you have green eyes. Another great example, some people out there, I'm not going to point fingers, but maybe you're going bald. You could wear a wig and you could hide it, but at the end of the day, you're still losing your hair. I know one thing that I'm a little conscious of is my height sometimes. I like to look tall and I like to look slim, so what do? I like to wear high heels because it changes the appearance of my figure. But at the same time, I'm still the same height and I'm still the same weight every day. So pick something about yourself that's personal. You can hide it, you can't change it, and write it in the middle. Now we're going to go around the star, 1 point at a time. The very first point of your star, I want you to write where you work. I have a feeling most people might write down Eastern College. On the second point of your star, I now want you to write down your favorite restaurant. Where is your favorite place to go and eat? On the third point of your star, please write down your favorite hobby or your activity, something you like to go and do on your spare time, probably out in the community. Now on point number 4, I don't want to cause any fights out there, but you need to write the name of your best friend, only one of them, on the point number 4. And then on the final point, I want you to write the name of your closest family member. Somebody within your family that you are very, very close to. So again, we have something personal about ourselves that we can hide but not change in the middle. And on the 5 points of our star, we have where we work, our favorite restaurant, our favorite activity or hobby, the name of our best friend, and the name of one of our closest family members. So now we're going to go through a nice little story. We're all going to have a day together, okay? So you wake up this morning and you decide that you are so done with trying to hide yourself. It is too much work to worry about those colored contacts, that wig, those stiletto shoes, whatever it happens to be. You're not doing it anymore. You are you, and you have come to terms with the fact that even though it makes you feel good sometimes to do those things, you don't need to do those things for other people. You are just going to be you. So you go out to work. Well, people with the red star, you're very, very lucky and blessed people. You see, you showed up to work today, and everybody was very, very supportive. They went around you just like any other day. Nobody said anything different. Nobody did anything different. Life was just normal, and it was good. So leave that particular corner of your star intact. Now, blue stars, let's go to you. You noticed a few little changes at work. Things were just a little bit different. People seemed to not quite be engaging with you the same way. They seemed a little more standoffish. You thought you heard people whispering when you walked into the staff room, but they very quickly stopped. At the end of the day, everybody's still answering your emails. They're still talking to you. They're still acting respectfully, but something seems a little off, and you're not really sure how people feel about you at your workplace anymore. I want you to take half of that corner of your star and fold down just half of it. Now the yellow stars, I'm really sorry, but you're having a rough day. You're having a rough day. You went into work and your peers were snickering at you. A couple of them even made rude comments really directly to you. You approached one of them to ask them about why people were treating you this way, and they actually just laughed at you and walked away. You went to your supervisor to talk to them about this because you didn't really know what to do about it. And your supervisor basically scoffed and said, well, I don't know what you expect me to do about it. You're the one who changed and expect everybody else to accommodate you. So you leave your supervisor's office, you finish up the rest of your day, and you decide that you don't really think this place is for you. It's not what you thought it was. Before leaving at 5 o'clock, you provide notice to your job and go home unemployed to look for new work. So everybody with the yellow star, I want you to take the whole corner and fold it all down to the middle. So what are we going to do? We're all done work. I think we should go out to our favorite restaurant, have a bite to eat, don't you? That sounds like a great idea. Red stars, you were so excited your favorite server came right up to greet you. Wasn't that wonderful? After seating you, they brought you your favorite meal. You were able to unwind. They made some small talk. You gave them a 25% tip because you were feeling real generous. And what a great experience. Your star gets to stay exactly the way it is. Now, blue stars, I'm sorry, you're not so lucky. You see, you went to the restaurant, and all of a sudden your favorite server, it was almost like they didn't recognize you. There was somebody who showed up after you, but they actually seated them first. And while they were walking over to seat them, they called back and used the wrong name while they told you that they'd be right back. Feeling pretty discouraged, you decide, you know what? I don't think this is for me anymore. And you decide to go to McDonald's instead. Fold the whole corner down. The whole corner. Yellow stars, you were pretty surprised. You showed up at the restaurant and the server didn't seem to recognize you. But after they did, they were very friendly. They were very bubbly, just like they always were. They brought you over to a booth just like you like, and they brought you your meal. It wasn't too bad an experience, but something was a little bit different. They kept bringing up the difference in your appearance. They kept talking about how much different you looked, and they couldn't believe that you were so gutsy to do that. They admire that so much. Must have come up 6 times during your meal when they checked on you. So even though they seemed really inviting and they seemed really supportive, you can't help but feel really uncomfortable, almost like you're under a microscope or with a spotlight on you. So I want you to turn half of your corner down. So the yellow stars, or was that the yellow stars? That was the yellow stars. We've all gone to our restaurant. Wonderful. So now we're leaving. What are we going to do next? I think we should go and we should pick up our friend and we should go to our favorite activity. That sounds like a great way to unwind, and some of us really need to unwind. It's been a stressful day. So red stars, you pick up your best friend, and they will not stop going on and on and on and on about your appearance. They can't believe the fact that you went and changed the way you looked. You were relieved to arrive at your favorite hobby and to have it get started, because once you were in there and you were doing that activity, nobody seemed to treat you any differently. Everything was back to just being normal. The spotlight was off and life was good. So what I want you to do is take your friend corner and I want you to turn it down halfway. And I want you to leave your personal activity corner as it is for the red stars. Now, blue stars, what's going on with you and your friends and your activities? Well, your friend praises you on your strength and they let you know that they're here to support you. If you ever need to talk, if you need to bring it up, feel free to let me know because I'm here. And then they move right along. They ask you about your day and have a normal conversation on your way over to the activity. Once you're there, you notice everybody around you is staring at you. They're pointing at you. They're whispering about you, almost like they're jeering and making fun of you. You don't feel comfortable being there anymore. So what happens? You lean over to your friend and ask them, hey, think we could get out of here? And they say, sure. You're going to leave your friend corner perfectly intact because they have been an awesome support for you. They've been accepting, they've been opening, but they haven't been putting the microscope on you. And when you needed something, they were there to help you get it. But you're going to take your personal activity corner and you're going to turn it all the way down because you don't feel comfortable going there anymore. And you don't feel comfortable engaging with those individuals. Now, the yellow stars, I'm so sorry. You got into your car and your friend scoffed at you the second they saw you. They can't believe that you look the way you do. Oh my goodness, you are letting yourself go. After about 5 minutes of this in the car, you start to explain to them that your stomach isn't feeling very good and you're not really sure if you should go out anymore today. And you end up turning around, dropping them off, and going home. So I want you to turn your friend corner over, and I want you to turn over your personal activity corner as well, because you never made it. And without your friend that you go to do this with every week, you might not make it there again. So what are we going to do? Our day is coming to an end, and it's been a pretty turbulent day so far for some of us. I think it might be a good idea to go home and talk to one of our family members, don't you? And maybe get some support there and get a nice listening ear. So the red stars, uncertain of your friend's response, you open up to one of your loved ones, and they provide you with really nice, empathetic responses. They listen to you. They reflect with you. They help you make a plan moving forward. They were just what you needed at the end of today. Now, blue stars, you've had a bit of a rough day too. Work made you pretty uneasy. And on top of that, the restaurant wasn't very kind to you, was it? No, they weren't very nice either. Your best friend was a great source of support for you, but what about your physical activity? That didn't turn out so hot either, did it? No. So you open up to your loved one and you talk to them. Now, they're being a little distant. They're being a little cold. They're not saying a whole lot. They're just kind of nodding and agreeing, saying, yeah, yeah. And so you just kind of trail off because you're not really sure about how they're responding to you, and you're not really sure if you want to go in any more detail, because do they really seem very interested? Do they really seem very invested or like they care? So I want you to take half of that family star and turn it over for that family member, for the blue stars. Now, yellow, you've had it pretty much the worst of all, haven't you? Today has not been your day. It's been a disaster right from the get-go. Work was an absolute show. You ended up leaving, and not just for the day, but permanently. You did not have a positive time at your favorite restaurant, with your activity, with your friend. Life has just not been going your way. So you go home and you break down to your family member, and you open up and you tell them about your struggles and everything that's been happening today, and you cry to them. You tell them about what's been scaring you and what's been hurting you and what's been working and what hasn't been working. And they sit there with their arms folded and their legs crossed and that look upon their face. My mother calls it the Mildred look, after my great-grandmother. That disappointed look, right down the nose. And they say to you, I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. You should be keeping your personal problems to yourself. They're personal problems, aren't they? It's nobody's business but your own, and you need to get over it. And they walk out of the room. Feeling alone, you got to start wondering what the purpose of life is. When you don't have a meaningful job with colleagues that support you and respect you, when you don't have a restaurant or an activity or a best friend to take you out and find the fun times and make the memories in your life, when you don't have a loved one at home that cares for you when you're sad and you're broken, what's the point? What's the purpose? And as you sit there and reflect on this, I'm sure you couldn't help but wonder, is there any point in continuing with your life? We see very high rates of suicide amongst the LGBTQ+ community. In this moment, when you think about your own foundation and how shook it just was, is there any wonder? I want you to think about it for a moment. Your life as it is, your activities, your friends, the places you like to go, who you work with, your loved ones when you go home at the end of the day. How much did all of that change when they found out something about you that you couldn't change? Something that's just a part of you. For some people, they're still nice, bright, shining stars. All of your points are pretty decent, maybe a few little changes. But there are some of us, like the yellow stars, that are probably feeling pretty battered and pretty defeated and very, very alone. It's a lot of these types of struggles that make it very challenging for the LGBTQ and the transgender community as a whole, because these are the types of fears that people are living with. Am I going to lose the respect of my colleagues and my peers? Are my loved ones at home still going to be there for me if I need them? Will I even still be able to go to the same places in my community and be treated the same way by the people who are providing me with service? It's all jeopardized in the moment when you decide to come out, because you're breaking the mold. You're breaking the expectations, and some people put those expectations into very, very high regard. So things like being not accepted by your family and friends, losing individuals at home, at work, and all around different aspects of your life, these are the real struggles. But there's also things like loss of employment and community engagement. We cannot actively discriminate against someone for their sexual orientation or for their gender identity. That is not a legal thing to do. However, does that stop people from acting inappropriately? Does it stop people from being disrespectful? Does it stop people from looking or finding the other things wrong in a situation? Sometimes it doesn't. Abuse, homophobia, transphobia, assault, harassment, all of these things are real happening items. It's not just the comments, and I don't want to say just as if I'm downplaying it, because words do hurt, but so do actions. So does being cornered in a bathroom because somebody feels like you don't belong there. So does being beat up in a parking lot. So does being assaulted in public at a dance club. It doesn't matter what your gender identity is. It doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is. Being excluded from society, being verbally harassed, being physically hurt and put at risk are all scary things. And they're things that nobody should have to be going through. So what is the product of all of these awful things on my list here? It's a terrible list, isn't it? Well, homophobia and transphobia, that's the biggest product. What are they? First of all, it's described as being a fear, an intolerance, or a discrimination against members of the LGBTQ community. And it can take a lot of different forms. Homophobia and transphobia is not just a one-ticket deal. It comes in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and we need to know what that looks like if we're going to be effective educational professionals that are going to facilitate a positive environment. First of all, it can be things like word choices, using inappropriate pronouns or offensive terminology. I told you not to worry about memorizing an entire list of things. Don't worry about that. But at the same time, do worry about little things like your mannerisms. If somebody has requested a specific pronoun, be conscious of that. They're personal pronouns because they're personal to that person, not to you. And we need to be respectful and mindful of that. On top of that, some words are a lot more friendly than others. We've learned that transgender is an umbrella term and that trans is an acceptable term as well. But what about terms like tranny? Absolutely not. So we need to be mindful that when we are referring to people within the community, we're using the appropriate verbiage, because otherwise we could really be hurting somebody. I often advise people that if you're coming from a very good place in your heart, even if you make mistakes, people will probably be forgiving. I've had people who have known me for such a long time, and they haven't seen me in years and years, and then they come up to me and they accidentally use the wrong pronoun. And then they apologize and they try to fix it, and it's really not a big deal, to me anyway, because I know that they're trying and I know they're making an effort. But the people who come up and say he, him, da-da-da-da-da, and it's just nonstop, and they're not being mindful, they're not being self-aware, and it's very clear that they're not really putting out an effort, well, that's a little bit different. I've been very, very blessed in my life to have a lot of support, but there are a lot of people out in the world who don't. What about the yellow stars in our community who don't have support? How many people do you think probably used the wrong term or the wrong pronoun intentionally because they felt they were right? And so if we're not being mindful, we may not be intentionally putting people down and intentionally using words that hurt, but is it not still going to hurt them if every other time someone used the wrong pronoun, it was meant to hurt them? Absolutely. Our words have an incredible power behind them, so we need to be very cognizant of what we do with them. On top of that, we need to be aware of how we treat people. Everybody should be treated the same. There's a big, big difference between equality and equity, though, and those are two things that we need to be mindful of both. Not only do we need to be just as available for everybody else, but we also need to be available in ways that suit their individualized needs. We can give everybody a pair of shoes, that's great, but wouldn't it be better to give everybody a pair of shoes that fit? All of our students need to have us there for them, physically, emotionally, and socially, but some of them have varying needs. So we need to be available, and we need that to be consistent across the board. But how much we provide to them needs to be geared towards what they need individually. Beyond that, we need to be aware that sometimes opportunities, be them social or employment or financial, could be limited by homophobia and transphobia. This is an active thing that we see. People could be held back from promotions or other things going on either within their workplace or within their community because of people's perception of them. I had a supervisor once when I was much, much younger in my teenage years, way back in the day. And she said to me one day when I came into work wearing makeup and I having my gel nails, her comment was, well, what am I supposed to say about all that to the customers? Interesting. Not long afterwards, I was moved from the jewelry counter right by the front door over to the customer service desk over in the corner. I was very good at customer service, but you can't help but wonder in the back of your mind if there might be a relation between those two concepts or those two problems. Whether there is or there isn't, it happens to some people, and it happens enough that it makes us conscious of it for ourselves as well. So the opportunities we provide people, again, we need to make sure they're equal. We need to make sure they're fair in all aspects of our classroom and our work environment. We also need to be aware of the explicit forms of homophobia and transphobia, things like hate speech, threats, and verbal abuse. Some people are very, very unkind individuals. It's a sad truth of our world. And we need to make sure that we are tuned in. When we hear those comments, we need to address them. I'm going to ask you guys a question. I'm sure pretty much everybody here has at some point heard the phrase, "That's so gay." What a huge problem with that statement when we're using gay as a synonym for stupid or dumb. Are we not just kind of inferring that gay is stupid or dumb? Little things like that. We may not even realize that this type of verbiage is hurtful, but it is. So sometimes it's explicit, it is said, it is a threat, it is out there, but sometimes it's even just the passing comments that we make that we just aren't thinking about. We need to be aware, conscious all the time. Hate speech, threats, and verbal abuse, what does that lead to? Oftentimes it leads to things like harassment, which means ongoing, it's not stopping, continued threats, verbal abuse, or possibly even physical issues as well. And this can relate to things like sexual or physical assault, and in its most extreme cases, even homicide. Some of the crimes against people within the transgender and the LGBTQ community are noted as being some of the most violent hate crimes in Canada. It's absolutely remarkable that we would penalize people over not fitting within a social construction so gravely. So what are the results of this marginalization? There's a lot of things that come. These are the byproducts of homophobia and transphobia. We have people who are having a difficulty finding stable income. And what does that mean? It means we have people who are living in poverty. Did you know that more than half of the transgendered residents living in Ontario are living on less than $15,000 a year? They are. The amount of people that we see entering the sex trade because they can't find other forms of stable work is also very, very high. Because a lot of people from the transgender community are fetishized and objectified. And so when they're left with few actual options within employers' frameworks, what are they left to do but use themselves as a vehicle to make an income? We have to have a roof over our heads. We have to eat, don't we? But we're setting them up for failure because of this binary world. That's what we're doing. We also see physical and sexual assault. The rates are so much higher. And did you know that 20% of transgender people in the same study I just referenced experienced physical or sexual assault because of their identity? And 34% were subjected to verbal harassment. And these are just the individuals from a study that were willing to engage that actually answered honestly. These aren't the ones that fall through the cracks, that don't get captured in our studies. So I would argue that these numbers could even be a lot higher than that. And that's the problem with some of these studies. We try to get the info, we try to get the facts so that we can draw a light on it, but is it easy for people to come forward and talk about? No, it's not. Homophobia and transphobia has a lot of very adverse effects, and when we look at it in a list like this, it probably seems pretty removed from us, I'm sure. Like, you know, we're here working in a wonderful college, and we have a very diverse staff, which we're very blessed to have, as well as a student population. But not every workplace looks like ours. That's the reality. In fact, a lot of places, even right here in our own background in New Brunswick, are working with a very, very different framework. I'd like to share a little bit of a personal story. I like to do this every once in a while, a couple of anecdotes. I find after we've learned some information, it kind of helps to put a picture to things. So I'd like to share a little bit with you about my own coming out, actually. Now, I was a little bit, I don't know if you'd say lucky or unfortunate. I got to do so twice. When I was in high school, I came out as a homosexual male. And later on in life, as I came to understand the transgender community better, I realized that that was an identity that resonated with me much, much stronger. And so I began my own transition process. Now, when I looked at the transition process for me, I realized very quickly that there were 3 different groups of people that I needed to talk to. Why? Because we have this world around us that expects me to be straight and a man, because I was born as a boy. And obviously, standing in front of you today, I am not a straight man. And people needed to figure that out. So I started with my mom. You have to understand, my mom, she is my main support system. And we all need a main support system, don't we? For some people, it's our families. For some people, it's our friends. For some people, it's our fur babies at home. I have a dog and a cat, and they're right up there too. But my mom was the first one that I wanted to talk to. And I was nervous. Because when I came out at 15 years old, she was very supportive, but she was scared. When I came out as gay, she was nervous that I would be bullied, that I would be harassed, that I would become subjected to all that homophobia and that discrimination that we just learned about a few minutes ago. So when I had to come out to her as a transgender person, I thought, oh my goodness, she's going to have a nervous breakdown. She was scared before, she's going to be terrified now. But the reality was actually much different. You see, in those years, from when I came out the first time to when I needed to start my transition journey, I had been growing and learning a lot. And so had my mother. She had been growing and learning a lot. Because the second I came out to her, she took the blinders off and she opened her mind and she started looking to see what other kinds of possibilities were out there. So we sat down one day and I explained to her what it was to be transgender because she had no clue. And I explained to her what that meant for different people and what kind of options there were and what that meant for me as far as what I needed to do to be a happy person. And do you know what she said to me? First words out of her mouth. Well, I guess we better go shopping then, because you have a business casual dress code at work and you're going to need some dresses. You're not going to work dressed like a man all summer, are you? And so what did we do? We went shopping. And it may not have been anything crazy expensive or crazy fancy. It was a lot of secondhand clothes to get me started. But when we were done that day, I had a whole wardrobe. And I was ready to go to work. I was ready for my casual days. I was ready for my days off. And it's thanks to my mom. It's thanks to the support that she showed me. No questions, no additional focus, no microscope, no spotlight. Just acceptance, support. And it was a really good start for me. So the next thing I did is I went and I talked to my friends. And they kind of laughed at me and they felt like I was the one who was slow figuring it out. You see, I had been doing drag shows for quite a while as a drag queen performer. And when I was on the stage performing as caricatures, I felt confident. I felt attractive. I felt good about myself. And the way I carried myself on that stage was totally different than the way I carried myself at work and in my personal life, because that's where I was comfortable. That's where I was confident. So for them, they thought, well, duh, we've seen this. How did it take so long for you to figure it out? And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So the first 2 check marks on my list were super, super positive. If this was my star, it would be looking good. until we get to the work one. So at the time that I started my transition, I was working in a nursing facility, and early on in my career, I worked in a couple of different nursing facilities around in New Brunswick. And this particular one was a very large one, and it was a higher level of care. So we had people with very extreme mental and physical needs. And I loved my job. I had been there for a couple of years, and I was really, really enjoying it. And I decided that I needed to go back from a stress leave that I had been on, and I needed to talk to them about what this was. This was a great opportunity. I had needed that time off because trying to figure out this transition for myself had really been taking a toll on my mental health. And the support that I had received from my mom and from my friends was building me back up, and I was ready to go back to work now. I was ready to be there, and I was ready to talk to more people and take that next step of the journey. And I was really surprised. You see, my oldest client that was living there was 106 years old. I know, right? I should be so blessed to be so old. And healthy, too, because she could still get up and take herself to the bathroom, too. And that's a huge feat in of itself. But you know what the most interesting and the most admirable part about that 106-year-old is? She never used the wrong pronoun with me. Not once. There was no judgment. There wasn't a lot of understanding. In fact, she very quickly told me on day one that I don't understand a lot of this whole gender thing, but I do know that if you say you're a girl, then you are a lady, my dear. And it was just that simple, because it didn't have anything to do with her. And I'm a big believer that what does that come down to? Respect. Every day when I walked into that nursing facility, I never walked into somebody's room and pulled the sheets off their bed. No, I went in and wished them a good morning and asked them how they felt. And while they were stirring, I went to get their things, and then we started doing things together. I showed those residents respect every day with every moment of my actions. And so when it came time for me to need that respect and that compassion in return, it was there, tenfold, from every single resident. Another gentleman I love to talk about, most of the things he would say to the staff I can't say on the camera. He was a very offensive man, and if you left his table 1 inch too far this way or that way, he was going to just ream you out. And a lot of people didn't even want to go in his room. His call bell would come on, and they would avoid it. They would put him off because they expected he was going to yell at them, call them every name under the sun, everything. So one day I was working on his wing, and his bell went off. And I thought, I'll get this. I got this. So I go in, and I'm expecting, World War III here. And I do my little thing, and he's grumpy with me the whole time, just like I expected. That's fine. And then all of a sudden, he says to me at the very end, before you go, I said, yes. He said, you a man or a woman? I said, oh, well, I'm actually transgender. I prefer to identify with female pronouns, please. And he said, I gotcha. That's what I thought. And I thought, here we go. Well, you're awfully pretty, and it's nice when you're here. Have a good day, you can go. So I went. Every day when I passed that man in the hallway, he would give me a little 2-finger wave, or a little tip of his baseball cap, a little smile. He never called me a name after that. He never used a single bad word after that. In fact, I got a lot of respect out of him that no other staff got. And it was very surprising. But the other part of this that was very surprising for me is what I got from my coworkers. You see, this is where things were very different. From my coworkers, I got comments like, how am I supposed to explain that to people? And, well, if your driver's license says you're a man, I don't see why I have to call you a woman. Or, woman, that's a matter of opinion, with a nice little laugh in the middle of the statement. These became things that I heard regularly. And with that in mind, it became very challenging as well. Because when I start to hear all of those things, it starts to take a toll on my own mental health. I start to wonder if this is actually the truth. It's being reinforced to me again and again and again. And not even these comments, not even all of them were made to my face. Some of them were made in my absence. Out in the smokers area out back when people were on break, people would scoff and laugh and jeer and make comments to themselves. There was one particular person who did this a lot. And one of my favorite comments that I think I ever heard is when I tried to approach her about it. I went and spoke to her and I said, look, I've always really respected your work ethic. You know, you're great with the residents and we've worked really well together, but I'm coming to understand that you might have a problem with me. I've been hearing about a lot of comments being made around the nursing home, and I just want to address that because I really want us to have a respectful workplace. I want us to be able to get along and be able to collaborate when we need to. And her response to me was that it was disgusting how I forced my perverted lifestyle choices on our patients, and I should keep it at home in the bedroom where it belonged. And there were a couple of other words thrown in there, but for my own professionalism, I omitted them. But needless to say, it was a very, very abrupt and very negative response. There was no open-mindedness. There was no willing to have a discussion. I was shut down immediately. So what did I end up doing? What did it do for me? Well, I went right back out on stress leave, first of all. I was not in good shape. In fact, I had had an issue with anorexia, and this caused a terrible relapse. I was hospitalized 3 times because of my internal organs, my digestive tract, and different problems like this. Standing in front of you today, I weigh a very, very healthy 120, 125 pounds or so, which is a little lower than I was before. At my lowest weight, I was barely creeping over the 100-pound mark. I was not very healthy with my medication. I was on a lot of anti-anxiety medication. I was on a lot of antidepressant medication. I was on a sleeping pill because the doctor didn't really know what to suggest for me, so I just kept getting more prescriptions for things because that's going to help, right? It doesn't help. Medication can be a facilitator. It can be a wonderful support, but it is not the be-all, end-all solution. There's so much more that we need to introduce to the picture if we want to make an actual difference. And medication alone wasn't doing it for me. In fact, I ended up getting very, very unhealthy. And when I went back to work again to try to fix all of this and to try to get back into the swing for a second time, I ended up injuring myself because I was weak. I wasn't strong. I had lost a lot of muscle mass. I wasn't eating well. I was tired. I couldn't think straight. I wasn't really meant to be at work at that time. I was meant to be recovering. I was meant to be figuring out exactly what I needed to do to be healthy for me. But I didn't know that. And I didn't have anybody around guiding me, telling me what I could do or telling me who I could reach out to for help. It was a very lonely experience. So finally, when I was able to get back to work and I was on modified duties, I realized very quickly the first problem I had is that I needed to make a difference, not just in my own life, but in the whole work culture here. Because if I feel this way, what are the chances that other people could feel this way? What happens when somebody who is transgender comes to live in that nursing facility? What happens then? What kind of support, what kind of compassionate care are they going to be receiving from the staff? What happens if people who are gay or lesbian or other transgender individuals want to come and work here? Are they going to feel comfortable doing so? Are they going to be able to mentally face that every single day? If I couldn't, what makes me think other people could? I can't make a change like that alone. I'm one person. I can try to be a catalyst. I can try to start it, but it's going to take a team. And I very quickly realized that I needed to find out who my team was to help me in this moment. And I realized very quickly I had an actual pretty diverse team. They may not have been a team of specialists. They may not have known all the ins and outs, but they were a team of people who were supportive, who cared, who were willing to help me find the answers and help me create the answers if they didn't already exist. It involved the management that I had. It involved my MLA to understand what was going on in the province. It involved the Labor Board, the Human Rights Commission, and our union, which I was very blessed to have. The reason why I was so blessed to have it is because at this time, there was no legislature in place protecting you for your gender identity. There wasn't anything. And without that union, I don't know how much support I may have gotten. But with this really holistic team, I was suddenly able to create a strategy with them. And it wasn't something I had to do alone. It was something I had support with. What did we do? First of all, we brought in educators. Just like I'm standing here in front of you today having this conversation, we brought in somebody else to have that conversation, to talk to the staff and provide them the info that they didn't have. Who are the transgender community? What is the difference? Everybody seems to think that it's something perverted that we should keep in the bedroom where it belongs. Let's break that mold. Let's get away from that and make a new understanding. That was our first step. We also needed to leave literature behind because we needed to leave a tangible, lasting impression, something markable. It's not something that we're just having a quick conversation to sweep under the rug. It's something we want to have a collaborative conversation, and we want to have results afterwards. And beyond that, we actually saw physical construction happening. We saw the actual building and developing of a gender-neutral locker room and a gender-neutral washroom within our facilities. Previously, we had a men's locker room and a women's locker room, and they took an old staff room that was no longer being used because we had a new staff room, and they converted it into a new one. And what it was is a little room you could walk in. There were a couple of chairs. Anybody could be in there, a nice little counter. And at the back, there was a wall with a door. And that is a door you can go in, close behind you, lock, and be in there by yourself to change, get dressed, and do what you need to do. And the lockers were in that room as well. And it was not just the transgender people who could use it, because I was the only trans person working there at the time, but other people had lockers in there too, men and women alike. And that was awesome because it broke down the mold. It's okay for people to use this. We're not putting people into a new box. It's something for everybody. On top of that, we had to actually hold people accountable for their actions. People who had been making comments like the ones I read to you before, they needed to be talked to. Not put in the corner and chastised and reprimanded, but rather be spoken with in a constructive way. They needed to be educated. And if we take a really negative and abrasive tone, are people going to be receptive to us? No. So it wasn't about being punitive and punishing. It was about educating and supporting. And the very interesting part about this is the actual change it made within the work environment. That following Christmas, the woman who made those comments to me, who told me it was so disgusting, so perverted, and I should keep it at home, she came up to me about a week before Christmas with a handwritten Christmas card. And as she started to talk to me, her eyes actually started to well up with tears, and she started to cry. She had such a hard time expressing herself. And she was apologizing. She told me that, she just came from a little hick place outside of town, and they had never even really met people who were gay, let alone transgender. And it was such a new thing for her, she didn't understand it. She thought it was all a sexual thing, something that was related to your interests in the bedroom, and she couldn't understand why it was something that you would ever bring to work until we had the education, until we put the literature on the wings, until we formalized and legitimized our actions by actually building these facilities and showing that we're going to invest in this. We want to make a physical difference. And suddenly she realized this has to be something real if we're investing like this. She started rethinking it, and when she digested that material, it made a huge impact on her. Now, in between her little sobs, she told me that she didn't know if she could completely support it because she had a hard time understanding how that felt or how that fit in with her religion. She was a very religious individual. And I told her that was okay because we can be different people. You can have your beliefs and I can have mine, but we can still respect one another. We can still come to work every day and treat each other like people, the way that we deserve to be treated. And that resonated with her too. That made sense. And moving forward, the rest of my time at this nursing facility, we never had any issues. And sometimes we even worked on the same wing. And we were able to get through everything we needed to do collaboratively, positively, with no negative effects. No resident on that wing would ever know that we had had some sort of quarrel or some sort of issue between us, because we were back to being a cohesive team. And that's because of education and the conversations that we finally had. So what I want to do is I want to take this and I want to translate this into what we can do here at Eastern College. This is a nice little anecdote and a nice little story to understand what it can look like to come out and how some people can be there to support us and some people are not. It's also a nice anecdote to show us that we actually have some power to do something in the environment and the world around us. But we need to take that and we need to put that Eastern College label on it and know what we're going to do right here for us. So we are going to look at what it means to become an ally. Who is an ally and how can we be one? We need to know what explicit as well as implicit acceptance are, because they're not the same things. These are two categories that I like to break things down into. We can be supportive in so many different ways, and some of them are very obvious. They're in the things that we say and in the very blatant actions that we take, but others are very subtle, and they're in the tiny words that we use and the little hints that we make. And we need to explore them both if we're going to be completely supportive with all of our actions. Beyond that, I want to take a look at social movements and progress, because there is currently a lot of really positive changes that have been happening around the Maritimes, and it's because of conversations and audiences like these. It's because we have people going around and having them, and we have people who are listening and then taking that out and doing something with the information. But just because we've made progress doesn't mean we're done. There's actually also a lot of shortcomings. There are a lot of problems right now, and there's a lot of things that we need your help with and your support. So first of all, let's look at an ally. An ally is described as being a heterosexual or cisgendered individual who supports the equal rights of the LGBTQ+ individuals and their social movements. It means that even though you aren't a part of that community, you are still being actively involved. You're doing something to show the fact that you care, you support, you understand, and you want to make an impact. You want to make a difference. And I think that this is one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle that sometimes we forget about. I started the Gay Straight Alliance in my high school years ago. And when I was there starting it, I was told, well, I don't know if you'll get very many people out here. You're the only out person in the school. And my comment was, well, I hope I get a lot of straight people, because quite frankly, it's a gay straight alliance. As the gay person, I know how I want to be treated, and I know what the problems are that I'm experiencing right now. But everybody else, I need to share that with them, and I need to get my perspective across. And that's not going to happen without allies. That's not going to happen with people outside of the community showing their support as well. So we can be an ally, each and every one of us, as instructors, as administrative professionals, as people within our management, if we're mindful of the implicit and the explicit things that we do, if we're mindful of our actions, and if we also keep an open mind as well. So the first thing that we need to do is become educated, which we have done. And now that we're educated, we can look at our actions and we can realize that we have obvious, intentional, and sometimes stated support that we can provide to our students. We are in a position as facilitators within our classroom to lead this group. They listen to us every day. One of my favorite activities as a CYC instructor is one day we do this thing where at the beginning of class I tell them to take their shoes off and put them by the door. And then around break time or so, I tell them they can go and get their shoes. And usually at this point people start asking what the point was. And I told them, just to make the point that you're going to do what I tell you to do, because that's the social construction. I'm the teacher, you're the student, you listen, I talk. That's what we do. And so with that dynamic, we do a lot beyond that. We have collaborative discussions, we engage with activities, and we try to break that mold a little bit to do things revolutionary. But in its core, we still have that presence where we are the ones leading the room, which means when there are activities going on in our community, we can talk about it. When there are new activities or approaches that are out there and being discussed, we can use them. We have that power. So let's explore our tool set. First thing that we want to look at are activities and introductions. So how many people introduce themselves to their class the first time they have them? I hope all of you do. So, one thing that I absolutely love that I want to share is how Suzanne introduced herself to one of her classes this year. She introduced herself, and in that introduction, she included the fact that her preferred pronouns were she and her. She's a cisgendered individual. We may think, why is she doing that? Isn't it kind of obvious? She's part of that whole heteronormative binary gender system, right? So we assume all that. But it normalizes it. It makes the conversation active. It shows people that it's okay to request your preferred pronoun. It's okay to ask people their preferred pronoun in a respectful way. We introduce ourselves so often. And we do activities within our classroom, don't we? We break people up into group and we ask them to look at case studies, or we ask them to read examples, or we write examples on the board and get them to reflect on questions. Why is it that most of our activities and our examples are centered around heteronormative, cisgendered people? Why can't we get away from that just a little bit? We still want to include them, don't get me wrong, because they are a big part of our society. But if we want to be completely and holistically inclusive, we need to make those activities more diverse. We need to make sure that in our own introductions, we're normalizing the conversations we want our students to be able to have comfortably. Because if we can do it and we can model it, they will also be able to do it. They will see their own success in what we can do, and they will reflect it back to us. Another thing I want to share with you are pronoun buttons. I love this initiative. I've been doing this with a few different groups that I go to. I hold contracts with different schools and different organizations, and Cumberland County and a few places in Nova Scotia are really big on buttons. They have actually purchased at a couple of schools button makers, and when they have their conferences or they have meetings with their GSAs, they will have people make pronoun buttons or make pride buttons. And I thought, I think this is great. Beyond that, we actually have this happening here at Eastern College. When I was in Fredericton, I had an incredible moment. I'm going to put Amber Pierce on the spot. She's one of their instructors down there, a wonderful, wonderful instructor. And she came to me wanting to know if I might have some craft supplies, because as CYC instructors, we're usually expected to have the craft supplies. So she came to talk to me, and she was explaining the reason why is she wanted to make name tags with people or some sort of button as part of her SSS class. She wanted to introduce the idea of showing and illustrating your pronouns and normalizing it. And I thought, wow, how incredible is this? An ally is coming to me within our framework, and they're looking to introduce a new activity into our curriculum, something at the very beginning when our students are first coming to us that will help to set the tone for the entire rest of their journey with us at Eastern College. What an incredible, incredible moment. So I told her about the button makers that we used at different school, and I said, you know what, you should go talk to Chris Cantor. And next thing you knew, she was. And Chris was very supportive. And next thing you know, there's a lovely little button maker on the Fredericton campus. And on my lanyard that I wear every day here, there is my little pronoun button, and I wear it with pride. It's colored in green in the background with navy blue she and her on it for my Eastern College colors. And there were all sorts of different pronoun buttons made by her class. The great part about this, too, is she didn't just keep these ideas to herself. She came and approached me and talked to me about it because sometimes I had taught these modules as well. And then she took those ideas to her director, and she got support from her administration. And all of a sudden, an idea turned into a tangible activity, something she could do within her classroom that would actually make an impact within the culture of the Fredericton campus. We can do that too. It's not always expensive. It's not always a big thing. Sometimes it's a little investment for a really big payoff. We have ally stickers, posters, and other sorts of literature. We can put these up in our classroom. We can put them up in our boards. On top of that, when we have events going on around our town or around our community, when Pride is here, we can share that with our students. When there are different posters coming out to advertise these events, we can make sure they make it onto our bulletin board. If we provide advertisement and notice for other sorts of community things that we want our students to get involved in, why not things relating for the LGBTQ community as well? We frequently have students who need to volunteer to get their hours in for their various programs. Why not volunteer with a Pride organization? Why not spend some time making a difference within this community? There are so many places that we often encourage students to reach out to. Let's start including this as well. Beyond that, I also want to talk about gender-neutral facilities. So I want to challenge people to start creating a new social construction. Let's make it more important when we go to the bathroom to wash our hands than it is to actually signal our gender identity. All the time we have gendered bathrooms, don't we? We have a boys' room and a girls' room. And this does so many things for us. First of all, what about everybody who does not fit into the binary system? What about the genderqueer and the bi-gender? What about all those people that we learned about today? Which facility is appropriate for them? Maybe we could argue they could use both, but are they going to feel comfortable in both? Are they going to be treated fairly by the people in both? What's the social norm there? On top of that, what about people who don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about those things yet? What about the person who might be trying to reflect on themselves and their identity and figure out exactly where they're at with their gender expression and their gender identity? And now we're putting them in this moment where they have to stand in front of those two doors and acknowledge to the whole world around them which one is their comfort. They're either going to feel like they're betraying themselves and making a compromise, or maybe they're going to feel like they're doing something they're not really ready to do yet. But we're not making them feel safe, we're not making them feel comfortable, and we're not making them feel welcomed here. So let's change the norm. Let's make it more about washing our hands, because we all need a little bit more soap, don't we? So the last thing we want to do is be available and make it known. So we've got the posters, we've got the buttons, we've got all sorts of things that we can do, but the bottom line is we can talk about it. We've been having a conversation today, and I told you already, I can be a catalyst to making changes, but I can't do it alone. And the same thing is true for each and every one of you. Each one of you has the power to be an ignition within your classroom and to spark something within this campus. But you're not going to do it by yourself. That fire needs to be fueled. And that comes from having conversations with your students. That comes from having conversations with your colleagues. When you make new connections in the community, that comes from inviting them in. We need to keep this alive and keep it going if we want it to have a lasting, meaningful impression within our campuses. Otherwise, one conversation can fizzle out and die. To change a social construction, we need to keep it active and we need to keep it going. So what about implicit acceptance? These are a lot of really great, obvious things that we can do, but there are a lot of little things. For the people who don't have time to give a presentation, who may be overloaded with curriculum, or perhaps even if we're working in an administrative role or we're not right in the classroom ourselves, what can we do? There's still a lot. Implicit are the verbal and nonverbal expressions that we use. They're those little teeny tiny things that actually make a huge difference. I've always been amazed at the fact that we can say something, but if the tone of our voice and our physical nonverbal expressions don't line up with it, people won't believe us. Those two things make a much more lasting impression than the actual just words that we're using. It's all about tone. It's all about how you say it. So is it any wonder that it would be the exact same thing when it comes to support and acceptance within the LGBTQ community? It is a huge thing. So what can we do to keep ourselves in check? There's a couple. First of all, we need to be aware of our unconscious bias. We learned today that we have our blinders on, and a lot of times we go around almost like a yardstick. We measure the world against our expectations of what we think is good, what we think is nice, what we think is appropriate. And we need to stop doing that. We need to start realizing that what's okay for me may not be okay for somebody else. We need to start realizing that not everyone is going to fit within the same box. And we need to start realizing that sometimes our language puts them in that box, and we need to fix that problem. We need to educate ourselves, which we've done. Congratulations. Nice little round of applause. On top of that, though, we need to educate others. You need to keep it going, talk to your students, and talk to your others. If you realize something when we walk away from here, if you realize there's something you don't know, don't be afraid to research it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I've had people say, well, don't you get nervous that people always ask you about your pronoun? Isn't it always frustrating that people constantly ask you questions? Even today, I had somebody ask me, don't you just want to be a girl some days? The truth is, I do. I really hate having these conversations. I don't like having to tell people my pronouns. I don't like having to tell all sorts of personal details about myself all the time. Sometimes I just want to go to work. Sometimes I just want to spend time with my family. Sometimes I want to just spend time with my friends. But the reality is, the more I stand here in front of you and have this conversation, the greater the chance that fewer people will be in my shoes that they have to. If as a group, I can talk to you and educate you, and then you can go out from here and educate others, I'm not going to have this conversation so many times. And there are a lot of other transgender people that may never have to have this conversation if we can change the social constructions. So educate yourself, but don't keep it trapped within you. Share it. Education is one of the things that we want to share the most. The other thing is avoid gender-based verbiage. How often do we talk about the waitress or the waiter? Why not talk about the server, right? How about the mailman? Why can't we just talk about the person who delivered the mail today? There are all sorts of different ways that we can approach things, and we can change the language. And it's not even just in our conversations. What about in our curriculum material? How many times has an instructor read through one of our PowerPoints and we happen to see he or she when reading an example? Why is that? Why can't we use they or them or their? Why can't we be neutral in our verbiage? And if we're going to be gendered, why can't we include all of it? We are reinforcing, if we use curriculum and examples and language that only acknowledge two genders and a heteronormative world, that this is how things should be, this is how things are supposed to be. And the reality is that's not true. There is no less value to a transgender person. There is no less value to anyone who is not heterosexual. We're all people with incredible gifts to give into this world, but with a closed mind, we won't be ready to accept them. So when we see things in our curriculum, what can we do? We can send in a ticket. We can ask for things to be changed. Again, we have that power. We have that control. We're the facilitators of our classrooms. So why not take that power and do something with it? Let's make sure that when we're talking to our class, we're using non-gendered verbiage and we're using diverse examples. And if we notice things in our slides, let's do something about it as a team. We can make a huge change. We have so many tools right at our fingertips. So use your diverse anecdotes, use your illustrations, and on top of that, be mindful of your pronouns. Littlest words, biggest problems. Be careful with them. When somebody asks you to use a certain pronoun, it's personal to them, and that's the best way I can say it. The same words I used earlier this morning. It's personal to them, not to you. Some people get so caught up in it. Well, I have such a hard time with that. I've known you as I, but it's not your personal pronoun. It's someone else's. You need to remove the I in all of those statements and start looking at them. How would you feel if everybody walked up to you and used the wrong pronoun consistently and then told you, oh, well, you know, it's just that I know you as? Would you feel very good about yourself? Probably not. Every time it would probably just be another little hit, little hit, little hit. Microaggressions are little tiny things that we do. They may not be intentional. They're kind of like a backhanded compliment, if you will, right? But after a while, they amount up to a lot. Almost like, you know, the days of our lives, like sands through the hourglass. So are the days of our lives. Well, so are microaggressions. They add up, little tiny grain, one at a time. But eventually, you've got a pile of something that you can notice, you can see. It is tangible, and it is there. So the little words can create big problems, and we need to be aware. We're talking, but we're not talking to ourselves. A lot of people have that benefit. They go to work, and they can talk to somebody privately, one-on-one, or they can have thoughts to themselves, or they can rehearse everything before they have to present it. But sometimes we're in the moment. Sometimes we're on the fly. Sometimes we're put on the spot. And that's why we have to be so polished. And that's why we also have to be so self-aware. Because if we're not self-aware, that's where we falter. So now that we understand a little bit about the different kinds of supports that we can do, I want to illustrate to you allies and social movements, who they are and exactly what's going on with them. These are just a few. I'm going to start by saying that because they are always changing. UBU is a wonderful support organization for transgendered individuals, and it's actually a relatively new one. It has a couple of new chapters that are in its grassroots. We have one here in Moncton, and we even have one in my hometown of Amherst, which is quite exciting for such a small town to have. Much like PFLAG Canada, it is a support model. So a lot of times the first hour of this might be for different people to talk and communicate, whereas another hour might be to have a guest presenter or some sort of education. But from one chapter to another chapter, they are very community driven. So within the comforts and the engagements of the people who are actually attending and being a part of that group. Beyond UBU and PFLAG, we have a lot more than just these support strategies, though, or these support organizations. We also have the Halifax Youth Project, which is very, very commonly heard of. They're very popular, and a very strong organization as well. They have a lot of resources and various outreach programs as well. But beyond all of these, communities have a lot of things that they're creating. Here in Moncton, we have the River of Pride. Fredericton, St. John, Halifax, all of them have pride organizations. And they do fundraising throughout the year so that when their Pride Week comes, they can host those activities. They can create awareness and basically promote acceptance and support within our town and our community. But we don't just see it in the big city centers anymore. Not anymore. Did you know that we see it in small towns now too? And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but I think it's incredible to see how it trickles down. Again, one person can create something, but when multiple people keep it alive, the impression lasts like a ripple effect. We have Crossroads for Women, which is also a very, very supportive organization as well. And some of these groups, like Crossroads, they don't just provide counseling and support, they also provide assistance with housing and making other connections within the community. And that's something important to note as well. The other reasons why I really wanted to acknowledge Crossroads is because of a recent event that they did. They just recently hosted Take Back the Night here in Moncton. And what I found particularly fascinating about that is for the first time, instead of acknowledging that this is an event designed at promoting women's safety at night and on the street, they acknowledged women with a holistic definition, and they included the transgender community. They recognized that violence against women also means violence against the transgender community, and they're using that language and that mentality that we need to see to propagate these continued changes within our town. We see places like the Salvis Clinic and Clinic 554. These are medical clinics, and I really need to draw your attention to them because although they're doing incredible work, they need our help. Salvis Clinic is right here in Moncton, and they assist with a lot of different programs, but one of the things that they also pride themselves on is they have specialists there that are prepared to support the transgender community. They have an endocrinologist to assist with hormone replacement therapy, and they have nurses who are there to monitor and do your blood work and all of this type of thing for you, as well as counselors to do your mental assessments. Clinic 554 is also a very, very comparable thing based out of Fredericton, and right now they're in jeopardy. They are also an abortion clinic and service other areas as well, and currently their funding is in jeopardy, and they're looking at the possibility of maybe closing if they haven't closed already. So although we have resources out there that are doing incredible work and they're really making a difference, we also see a structure around them that is not completely supporting them. And if we don't start talking about it, if we don't start supporting them, if we don't start talking about how much we need them, we're going to lose them. They won't be there anymore. So what can we do? Because the last one on the list, it's us. We are the final ally and social movement because we can have that impact within our campus. And what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we're going to be tenacious because we have a lot of different things we can do with these organizations. And again, I'm going to take a moment here to share a little story. You see, I often had this mentality that how much of a change can one person have? And this is a very immature mentality that I had 15, 20 years ago. And it's grown and it's changed with me a lot over the last little while. You see, Cumberland County is my home county. Amherst is my hometown. Very small town, tiny little county. And it has seen quite an evolution from 2005 up until today. 2005 was a year that I started doing a lot of my public speaking. I started planning in 2004 and my first speech was in 2005. And it was not like the one here today. I feel very comfortable in front of all of you here today, which I really appreciate, thank you. I didn't really feel so comfortable back then. You see, my first speech, I had been invited to speak at a Lions Speak Out competition. It was being hosted by the Rotary Club and a few other organizations in the town, and it was open to the public. So there was a nice big audience, lots of people there. It was quite an exciting event. I was told that I needed to pick a topic that I felt was important and current to the youth. I chose homophobia. because that was very current and appropriate to me, and I felt as though there were a lot of people that needed some education on the topic. Well, I went and I gave my speech. The other topics were about vacationing and the importance of taking time for yourself. So I went and I gave my speech, and I received 3rd out of 3. My topic was deemed too controversial. You see, the Speak Out competition, this was in its very first level, and it was meant to go from level to level to level and work its way up to an international event. And the judges felt as though I would probably not be well received with such a controversial topic at other levels within the competition. So I was put in 3rd place. I'm not one to toot my own horn. The first 2 weren't very good, though. But that's fine. I walked out of there and I felt discouraged. But I was like, that's okay. Public speaking doesn't need to be my thing. I don't have to be a good public speaker, because that's how I took it. I assumed I must be the worst public speaker in the world, because the whole time you were there, you could have heard a pin drop. And it wasn't because they were hanging off my every word. It's because they were all so busy staring at the floor, or checking their phones, or going to the bathroom, or rustling through papers. Nobody was wanting to pay attention to me. Everybody felt too awkward. Nobody was ready to hear this and have this conversation. And I did not feel well received. I didn't put 2 and 2 together and realize that maybe people were just closed-minded and not ready. I assumed that the problem was that I was boring. So I learned a little bit different not long later, though. You see, they recorded this, and much to my surprise, they aired it on Eastlink television. And of course, being in a small town, do they have a lot of exciting things to air on Eastlink? Limited. So it aired almost every single night for an entire summer. Oh, no. Yes. So everybody saw it again and again and again and again. And at first I was mortified. I'm like, oh my goodness, no. But then I started getting really excited. You see, everybody in town had a very different response than the judges at the events. They all thought I was a great public speaker. They thought I was very engaging. But even more exciting than that, they agreed with my opinions. They wanted to support. They didn't think it was right that people were being mistreated. Come down to they were. They did not think of it that way. A lot of people said that they never would have considered it. Some people that were older even approached me in the store that I worked at when I was in high school, and they told me that, you know, I never really thought of it that way. You know, even when I was a kid, we made fun of people, but this makes more sense. Ignorance is not always a choice. Sometimes it's just a byproduct of our environment. We haven't had an opportunity to learn and get to know anything better. That's why it's so important for us to be that vehicle of education. So what did I do? Well, I realized, first of all, they may not have liked me in that first audience, but if other people did, maybe there are other people that'll listen to me. I'm going to give this another go. So I started going around and talking to several different high schools, and I started going to middle schools, and I started going to colleges and universities. And next thing I knew, things started to change a lot around Cumberland County. First of all, we had our very first Pride celebration, which was so exciting. It happened in 2008. And we expected 5 or 10 people to show up, and we were excited when we got a huge turnout of 20 people. To our flag raising. We had a couple small events, but we were happy that anybody showed up. It was what it was. The next year, we downsized, and we cut it down, pretty much just did a flag raising and made it smaller. But over the next several years, that flag raising grew in size, a few more people every year coming out to support it. We got a gay-straight alliance. We created it within my high school. Then we started helping other high schools to create them as well. Change kept continuing to happen, and it was beautiful to watch. I went to prom with another male, and I was cheered and clapped for when I walked into my prom. And I was terrified getting out of that limo that people would jeer and snicker, but they were supportive. 4 or 5 years earlier, they wouldn't have been. That's some of the change that was just starting to happen, and it wasn't even done there. 2017 was a huge year. Especially for me. It was one of my most exciting years. I was honored as being I was receiving an award for International Women's Day in my hometown. Not International Transgender Women's Day, International Women's Day. And that made me so happy and so proud. And you'll see this picture of me in the newspaper. And first of all, remember that hat, because you're going to see it again. Not here, but in another slide. But the building I'm in that you see behind me, this is the same hall as my first speech in 2005. The difference from 2005 to 2017, it wasn't just that I was posing in calendars or doing speaking tours or talking on the radio. It was the fact that this was having an impression on people, and they were also having this conversation. I was not speaking to a room, staring at the ground, waiting for their first chance to escape. I was speaking to a sold-out audience with standing room only around the entire side of the room. We sold out of food and ran out, and people were still willing to buy a ticket just to come and hear my speech. And I received a 10-minute standing ovation at the end. But all of this isn't even the most amazing part, believe it or not. The most amazing part was the end. It took me over an hour to get out of there. Everybody wanted to talk to me about how proud they were of me and the different changes that they'd seen in the community, and how excited they were to see Amherst growing and changing like this. But the person who was the most excited about it was a woman named Emma and her daughter Sarah. Emma had heard me speak a little while before, maybe a year or two before this event, and she wanted to bring her daughter Sarah to meet me because she felt as though I would be an excellent role model for her. You see, not long after she heard my speech, her son, Austin, had come and approached her and said, "Mom, I want to wear dresses." And Austin, being on summer vacation after grade 1, was supported by his mother to wear dresses. And when Austin said, "I would like to be called Sarah," her mother, Emma, said, "Okay." And when she requested female pronouns, that was the result. She. So this little girl was coming up to meet me in Amherst, a resident of such a small town. And her mother and her were able to tell me about how she had just gone back to school this year into grade 2 after this journey through the summer. And her whole school was supporting her. Her teachers were calling her by Sarah when they called their attendance. They were using female pronouns. And do you know what else they were doing? Inviting me to come and speak to the students, so I could talk to the kids in her class and in other classes around her about what it is to be transgender in words and language that made sense to them and their level. She has so many friends. They run around and they play. It's absolutely incredible to see. And that's something I didn't have when I was little. And I think it's beautiful to meet her here. Now, this isn't the last time I've met Sarah. In fact, this story is actually going to be wrapping up here in a minute with another time that I happened to see her that very same year. You see, 2017 was also the year we had our very first Pride Parade. And I was so excited they asked me to be the Grand Marshal. So I got to sit on that Mustang and wave to everybody like the Queen and feel so special. And I also got to give a speech on the bandstand. I was so floored. More people showed up to this parade than our Christmas parade. There were some news outlets that said there were approximately 2,000 people there. Absolutely incredible. The number of people that were in the parade, again, bigger than our Christmas parade. The support that came pouring out of this small little town was so overwhelming. It was just absolutely beautiful. And the most beautiful moment came at the end of the parade for me. You see, I went up to the bandstand and I was getting ready to give my speech. The parade was done. Everybody's gathering in the town square. It's a beautiful little picturesque moment. And this is Sarah. You'll notice she's wearing the hat from the luncheon. I gave it to her as a souvenir. And she wanted to wear it to the Pride parade. So she came up to me and we were talking up on the bandstand. And I asked her, I said, "What do you think about today? How does it make you feel?" And she said to me, "It makes me feel proud and safe to be a girl in Amherst." Those are words that even today I sometimes struggle with. And to see that confidence and that extreme amount of happiness in such a young person, to me, it's beyond moving. This is the product we're looking for. We're looking for an environment that is safe and supportive and completely inclusive for our children and for the upcoming environments, for our colleagues and the people that we work for. We're looking for people to feel safe, to feel cared for, and to feel welcomed. That's what we have the power to do every day in our lives, and as instructors, we can also do it to a bigger scale within our classroom. So what's left to do? Well, we've seen so many changes. In fact, just recently, that same year, Bill C-16 passed through the Senate. It included gender expression. And just a year before that, New Brunswick started covering surgical transition costs, things like hormone replacement therapy and some surgeries for the transgender community. Before that, they were the last province that was not holding it. Did you know that when I started my transition, if I didn't have private Medicare coverage through my job, I would have been paying easily a couple of $100 a month out of pocket just for medication? That's something that has only been changed for 3 years. And while all of this may seem very positive, because now we no longer have any provinces in Canada that provide no coverage and no support, it's still not a completely holistic solution. There's still a lot we need to do as a team. First of all, we need to realize not every province covers the same stuff. Some provinces will cover everything. They will do laser hair removal, breast augmentations, removal, contouring, the actual sex reassignment surgery. They will pay for everything through Medicare. Others will not. Even here in New Brunswick, as one example, they will not cover augmentations. They will not cover laser hair removal. A lot of these things are deemed to be cosmetic. But I would argue, how feminine or how good about themselves does a woman feel if she's able to have a vagina but has a full beard that she can't do much about because hormone replacement therapy didn't do very much for her with her body's chemistry? When we don't provide all the supports, we don't provide a complete solution. And this is one of the big things we need to do. We need to realize that we need more supports, we need more clinics, we need more actual Medicare coverage as well. We also need to keep our own mind open, and we need to open the minds of others through the conversations that we have. We need to make a commitment to change by changing our language, the everyday little things that we do, as well as the big things that we do. So I know we're getting near the end of the time, and what I'd like to do is just take the last few minutes here to do a little bit of an activity with you. I'm actually going to take a break and let you fill this out. And what it is you will find what's called a personal commitment form, and your facilitators, I believe, might have these to pass around. This is what they look like, nice and blank, and I have one here that I had one of my colleagues, the lovely Suzanne, fill out. And what it is it's a form where we're going to recognize what we've learned today. We've learned about the social construction of gender, who the transgender community is, what coming out is all about, and what that looks like. We've learned how to be explicitly and implicitly supportive, and how we can be an ally and what kind of support that is. This form is going to capture that for you. And it's also going to provide a little space where you can acknowledge what has resonated the most or made the biggest impact on you today. Just underneath of that, there is a section where you're going to be able to make a commitment. What are you going to incorporate into your classroom? What are you going to do in your life or on your campus to make a difference? How are you going to show your support? As an example, Suzanne filled hers in, and she noted that some of the things that really surprised her the most or made an impression on her were the implicit strategies to show support, all those nice little things that we can do. She also wrote down the impacts of allies and social movements. That really resonated with her because we went through this before you guys. So under the what she wants to do, she actually listed 3 things because she is just a rebel and didn't want to stay within the rules of 2. And that's great. If you have 3, 4, 5, 10 things you want to do, go for it. But what did she say? She wants to use inclusive pronouns in all staff and student interactions, including lectures and curriculum development. She wants to promote activities that speak to gender equity and LGBTQ awareness. And she wants to become an Eastern College LGBTQ+ ally. Those are great goals, and I think they're going to make a huge impact here on our Moncton campus, and I want to hear from you on what you want to do. So while we take a break for a couple of minutes that you can have a chance to fill that out, if you have any questions, any comments, or anything that you'd like to share, I'd encourage you to type it on in. We're going to treat it like a parking lot for about 2 minutes, just a really quick couple minutes, because I know we're almost done. and I will try my best to answer them as quickly as we can. Beyond that, if anybody has any questions or concerns that we don't have a chance to get to today, I encourage you please to reach out to me via email and just include PD Day presentation as the topic, because as I'm sure you know, sometimes we get a lot of emails, and I want to make sure that I'm able to pick those out to get back to people appropriately. So thank you so much for your time, and we'll be right back in just a couple minutes after you have a chance to fill out those forms.